What's the craziest thing that happened when you turned 18? A woman cornered me in the school parking lot and said, "I'll give you $40,000 to come home with me." I froze. Who are you? I'm your birth mom, and I want to reclaim you. My brain short-circuited. I'd been dreaming of this day ever since I was a child, and never expected it to start with a bribery. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong person," I said coldly, before shoving past her and running for the school bus. That night, my phone buzzed with a notification from Venmo. $40,000 from Fiona Gold, my birth mom. The message read, "Tell your fake parents you hate them. Come home to your real family." I stared at the huge number. It was the exact amount I needed for college. That's when my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer until that same number sent me a text minutes later. "Rose, they bought you from me when I was 15, but in 3 months you turn 18. You can choose to be with me. I don't understand what you want. I want my daughter back." "Why now?" "Because you have 7 siblings, all in foster care. They ask about their big sister every day." My stomach dropped. "But if you come back, if you help me prove I can maintain a family unit, I can get them back." I hung up. At home, Mom was in the kitchen making my favorite lasagna. "How was school, sweetie?" I almost told her everything, until Dad walked in, exhausted from his second job, and kissed my forehead. "Got some good overtime this month. NYU's looking more possible every day." The next morning at breakfast, I broke down. "Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something." I showed them everything. Mom's coffee mug slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. "Oh gosh, not again." "Again?" Dad pulled out a filing cabinet from the hall closet. Inside were folders filled with legal documents and restraining orders against Fiona. "She tries to reconnect every few years," Mom whispered, tears streaming. "We've spent everything fighting her. We didn't want you to know. Didn't want you to feel like I wasn't worth fighting for," I finished. "Like you were being fought over," Dad corrected. My phone buzzed with another Venmo notification. $1,700 with the message, $100 for every year your parents stole. When I didn't respond, she followed up with, "Your real siblings need you. They cry for you. Be the sister they deserve." I screenshotted everything. That week, Fiona escalated. She sent CPS to our house with an anonymous tip about medical neglect. The Venmo offers increased to $50,000, then $60,000. That's when I realized what I had to do. I called Fiona back the next day. "I've been thinking about your offer." Her voice brightened immediately. "You have? The money. It would change everything. And those kids, my siblings, they deserve better than foster care." She laughed, relief flooding through the phone. I met Fiona at a coffee shop the next day where she coached me through fake tears. "Remember, you need to say they made you feel like a burden after the cancer you beat. That they threw the medical bills in your face. They would never. That's not the point. The judge needs to hear it." She introduced me to 3 witnesses she'd paid, including my dad's estranged brother who'd agreed to testify for $10,000. "He's going to say he saw them lock you in your room," Fiona explained casually. "And this woman will say she heard your mom call you ungrateful at the grocery store. Once I have you, all my other kids follow. That's 8 kids, Rose. Maximum government support, tax benefits, and the survivor benefits from your biological father's death." My blood went cold. "My father's dead?" She waved her hand dismissively, sliding a document across the table. "Sign this. It says you want to explore reunification." I signed it. She had no idea my phone was recording in my pocket, or that my parents' lawyer was receiving everything in real time. 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, we all walked into court. Fiona had coached me to sit away from my parents, to flinch when they tried to touch me. Fiona took the stand, tears streaming. "I just want my daughter back. I want her to know her real siblings before it's too late." Then the judge turned to me. "Rose, I'd like to hear from you." I stood up slowly, just like Fiona had coached me. "Your Honor, I have something to say." I pulled out my phone and Fiona's voice filled the room. "He's going to say he saw them lock you in your room. And this woman will say she heard your mom call you ungrateful at the grocery store." I even included everything she said about getting maximum benefits. The judge turned to Fiona. "Ms. Gold, where are your other children currently placed?" Fiona's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. They're in temporary care." "Where specifically?" Fiona broke down crying. "They don't let me know. The system is broken. But Rose is almost 18, she can choose." That's when I stood up again. "Your Honor, wait." My parents' faces went pale. Fiona made mistakes, but she was 15 when she had me. I want to give her a chance." The judge looked stunned. "Are you saying you want to live with your biological mother?" I avoided my parents' eyes. "My siblings need their sister. Maybe we all deserve a second chance." I moved in with her that night. My parents tried to stop me, but I was almost 18. She fell asleep smiling, thinking she'd won. But I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling of her roach-infested apartment, because I knew I had to play the long game. The next morning, I woke up to Fiona banging pots in the kitchen, and she'd cleared one corner of the counter to make breakfast. She was humming and smiling bigger than I'd ever seen anyone smile at 6 in the morning. The eggs were burnt black on one side and runny on the other, and the toast had green spots that definitely weren't supposed to be there. She poured expired milk into a glass and set it in front of me with this proud look on her face. I forced myself to swallow each bite while watching a mouse run behind the stove. She kept talking about how happy she was to finally have her baby home and how we'd make up for lost time. My stomach turned, but I nodded and smiled back at her. When she went to shower, I grabbed my phone and typed out our agreed code to my parents. Just 2 words that meant everything was okay for now, and Mom sent back 3 heart emojis instantly. I knew she hadn't slept at all because the timestamp showed she'd been online all night. I took photos of everything in the apartment, the roaches crawling up the walls, the mold in the corners, the broken window held together with duct tape. My fingers moved fast as I emailed Derek every detail from the night before, attaching the photos and screenshots of Fiona's latest Venmo attempts. He wrote back within minutes telling me to keep documenting but not to take any risks that might make her suspicious. At the school, I sat in math class staring at the same equation for 20 minutes without writing anything down. Hope Bailey noticed from across the hall during passing period and pulled me into her office. She didn't ask questions, just told me I could use her office anytime I needed quiet space or just wanted to sit. Her eyes said she knew something was wrong, but she wouldn't push until I was ready to talk. That afternoon, a woman named Leslie Kramer called and said the court had assigned her as my guardian ad litem. She explained her job was to figure out what was actually best for me, not what either set of parents wanted. She scheduled meetings at both houses and mentioned she'd seen lots of cases where money became the real issue instead of the child. 2 days later, I was doing homework at Fiona's kitchen table when someone knocked hard on the door. Kelly Roy from CPS walked in with a clipboard and started taking photos before Fiona could even object. She documented the roaches scattering when she opened cabinets, the black mold growing in the bathroom, the locks that didn't work. Fiona kept making excuses about how she'd just moved in and was still fixing things up. Kelly's face stayed neutral, but I could tell she wasn't buying any of it as she wrote notes on her clipboard. That evening, Fiona grabbed for my phone while I was texting, saying we needed family privacy and my adoptive parents were probably tracking me. I'd already backed up everything to the cloud and had recording apps running in the background constantly. I handed it over without fighting and let her think she'd won this round. She went through my messages and deleted my parents' numbers, not knowing I had them memorized anyway. The next morning, the bank called about the Venmo transfers, explaining they had to report any gift over $15,000 to the IRS. The woman said this could mess up my financial aid applications for college if it counted as income. I called Derek right after, and he told me to freeze access to those funds immediately and document that they were bribes, not gifts. I spent an hour on the phone with Venmo support getting everything locked down while Fiona was at work. That same day, Alan posted on Facebook about how my adoptive parents bought a baby from a desperate teen mother. He tagged half the people in town and included old photos of my dad from when they were kids. I screenshotted everything before he deleted it an hour later, probably after sobering up or realizing he could get sued. The post had already been shared dozens of times, and people were commenting asking if it was true. 3 days after that, my parents texted asking to meet at a coffee shop downtown where we could talk without breaking any court orders. They picked a place with outdoor seating so everything would be public and documented. Mom brought my favorite turkey sandwich, and Dad had papers from Derek about communication boundaries. We sat far enough apart that no one could say they were pressuring me or violating Fiona's space. They explained they couldn't visit or call directly because Fiona could claim harassment, so everything had to go through Derek now. Mom's hands shook as she passed me the sandwich, and I could see she'd lost weight in just the few days since I'd left. Dad kept his voice steady, but his eyes were red and puffy like he'd been crying. We agreed on signals for emergencies and set up a schedule for checking in through the lawyer. They promised they'd keep fighting but would follow every rule so Fiona couldn't use anything against them. I wanted to hug them, but knew someone might be watching or taking photos to use in court later. Instead, I just nodded and took small bites of the sandwich while we went over the plan. The whole meeting lasted 20 minutes before Derek said we should wrap up to avoid any appearance of coordination against Fiona. 2 days later, Leslie showed up at Fiona's apartment for our scheduled interview. She sat across from me at the sticky kitchen table while Fiona pretended to clean dishes in the next room, but really listened to every word. Leslie asked why I'd chosen to move in, and I explained about wanting to know my siblings, keeping my voice steady while Fiona banged pots louder whenever I paused too long. Leslie wrote notes in her folder and watched how I kept glancing toward the kitchen, then asked if I felt safe here. I nodded quickly and said everything was fine, that I just needed time to adjust. She leaned forward and warned me about taking on too much responsibility for other people's problems. Her eyes stayed on mine longer than necessary before she packed up her papers and left. The next morning, I walked to the foster care agency office downtown and filled out 12 pages of paperwork requesting supervised visits with my siblings. The coordinator, Liana Rivers, reviewed each form and explained the process would take several weeks for background checks and home evaluations. She showed me photos of each kid in their current placements, and I memorized their faces, especially Michelle, who had my same nose and chin. Liana said Michelle had been asking about her big sister for years, but nobody knew where I was until now. I signed the last form, and she promised to call as soon as the visits got approved. Back at the apartment, Fiona had set up 2 chairs facing each other and told me we needed to practice for court. She demonstrated how to let tears fall without wiping them, how to make my voice crack at the right moments. She coached me through phrases about feeling unwanted and burdensome, making me repeat them until they sounded natural. My phone recorded everything from my pocket while she adjusted my posture and taught me to flinch at certain words. We practiced for 3 hours until she was satisfied with my performance. The library downtown had public computers where I searched for my biological father's death records. After 40 minutes of searching different databases, I found his certificate showing he died 2 years before Fiona claimed, from a car accident, not the illness she described. The certificate listed no life insurance policies and showed outstanding medical debts at the time of death. I took photos of the screen with my phone and forwarded everything to Derek with a note about the timeline discrepancies. Hope met me in her office the next day with a stack of financial aid appeal forms. She explained how to document that the Venmo transfers were coercion attempts, not gifts, and helped me write a statement about the bribery. We attached all the screenshots and legal documents showing Fiona's pattern of harassment. Hope had handled similar cases before and knew exactly which evidence the committee needed to see. She submitted everything online while I watched, then printed copies for my records. That evening, Fiona handed me a thick packet of government benefit applications already partially filled out. The forms listed 8 children living in the household even though it was just us 2 in the apartment. She pointed where I needed to sign as an adult dependent and pushed the pen toward me. I said I wanted to read everything first and took the packet to my mattress on the floor. While she watched TV, I photographed every single page with my phone, getting clear shots of her handwriting claiming false dependence. When she came to grab them back 20 minutes later, I'd already documented everything. Kelly showed up at my adoptive parents' house that afternoon, investigating another anonymous complaint about educational neglect. Mom later texted me through Derek that she'd shown Kelly my report cards from the past 4 years. All A's and B's with perfect attendance. Kelly had rolled her eyes and noted this was the 4th false report in 2 months, all from the same phone number. She'd started a formal investigation into harassment through false reporting. The status conference at the courthouse lasted 90 minutes with everyone crammed into a small room. The judge reviewed all the recent reports and complaints, then maintained the current supervised arrangement despite Fiona's lawyer arguing for immediate full custody. She scheduled complete home evaluations for both households within the next month. Fiona's lawyer protested this was unnecessary, but the judge cited the CPS concerns about living conditions and the pattern of false reports. Fiona sat silent and furious while the judge set another hearing date for 6 weeks out. 3 days later, Liana called to say my first sibling visit was approved and set up a video call with Michelle. I sat in the agency office staring at the laptop screen when a little girl appeared with dark hair and pigtails. Michelle asked immediately if I was really her sister and why I never visited before. Her foster mom sat beside her rubbing her back while Michelle showed me her stuffed animals and drawings. She'd drawn pictures of a big sister she'd never met, always with long hair like mine. I promised we'd meet in person soon and she made me pinky swear through the screen. The call ended after 20 minutes when Michelle started crying and asking why we couldn't live together. That Friday, Fiona invited one of her paid witnesses over for dinner, a man who smelled like cigarettes and kept forgetting his practice lines. She coached him through the story about seeing my dad yell at me outside the grocery store last summer, correcting him on dates and details. She made him describe what my dad supposedly said, what I was wearing, how other shoppers reacted. My phone recorded from my lap as she showed him photos of my dad and pointed out identifying features. The man practiced his testimony between bites of frozen pizza, while Fiona adjusted his wording to sound more believable. After he left, she seemed pleased with the rehearsal and said the judge would definitely believe him. The next morning, Leslie called and told me I needed to see a therapist she'd picked for evaluation. I drove to the office building downtown and spent 2 hours answering questions about how I was handling everything. The therapist kept writing notes while I talked about moving between houses and recording Fiona's coaching sessions. She asked if I felt safe and I told her about the roaches and broken locks, but said I could handle it for now. At the end, she wrote down that I was showing stress but keeping good judgment and coping well with a hard situation. When I got back to Fiona's apartment, she was at the courthouse filing papers with some guy she met online who said he knew legal stuff. She came home mad because the clerk sent her away saying she filled out everything wrong and couldn't file an emergency motion like that. The clerk told her she needed a real lawyer and proper forms to request full custody of all her kids at once. That night, my phone buzzed with an alert from my credit monitoring service that made my stomach drop. Someone had opened a credit card in my name with a $5,000 limit using Fiona's apartment as the address. The application had my social security number that she must have taken from my papers when I wasn't looking. I showed her the alert the next morning and asked why she would do this. She looked confused and said I must have signed up for it myself and forgotten because I was so stressed from my adoptive parents messing with my head. She kept insisting I was being paranoid and seeing problems that weren't there. I didn't argue with her but went straight to the police station and filed a report for identity theft. The officer took my statement and gave me a case number to add to Derek's growing file of evidence. Mom texted me through Derek that they found all the original adoption papers from when I was a baby. The documents showed they paid normal legal fees and medical costs like any adoption, not the crazy story Fiona kept telling about them buying me. The agency records proved everything was done right, and that Fiona signed all the papers freely even though she was only 15. They had statements from the social workers and nurses who were there saying nobody forced her into anything. Derek took copies of everything to Leslie's office and filed them with her report about the case. She pulled me aside after reviewing them and said the evidence was overwhelming against Fiona, but warned me she might do worse things when she figured out she was losing. She'd seen birth parents get desperate before and told me to be extra careful and keep documenting everything. 2 days later, Fiona sat me down and said if I didn't stop talking to my adoptive parents completely, she would demand all the Venmo money back. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were angry and she kept tapping her fingers on the table. I stayed quiet for a minute, then told her I still needed them for practical stuff like college recommendation letters. She didn't like that answer, but I said Derek was working on the legal response about the money, and we'd figure it out soon. Kelly called me that afternoon to say she was opening a formal investigation into all the false reports against my parents. She explained that making fake CPS complaints was actually a crime, and Fiona could get in serious trouble for it. She gave me a special phone number that went straight to her cell, and said if I ever felt unsafe, I should call and someone would come right away. The next day at the school, Hope pulled me into her office during lunch and taught me how to document things properly for court. She showed me how to mark timestamps on recordings and make multiple backups, and identify witnesses clearly in my notes. She'd helped other students in custody battles before, and knew exactly what judges cared about seeing as evidence. She gave me a special notebook and showed me how to write entries that couldn't be questioned later. Fiona had been making phone calls all week and finally told me we had a meeting with a tax guy who could help us get more money. We drove to this office in a strip mall where a man in a wrinkled shirt explained how to claim all 8 kids as dependents on tax forms. He kept talking about maximum benefits and deductions while showing us forms on his computer screen. Fiona nodded along and asked about claiming kids who didn't live with her yet but would soon. The man said that was fine as long as nobody checked too closely and started explaining how to make it look real on paper. I recorded the whole thing on my phone while he admitted it would be fraud since the other kids were still in foster care. He even joked about how the government never really checked these things if you did it right. Fiona paid him in cash and took a stack of forms he printed out for her to fill out later. On the drive home, she was excited about all the money we'd get back and started planning what to buy with it. I kept quiet and sent the recording to Derek as soon as I got to my room. The walls were so thin I could hear her on the phone with someone talking about how she'd have all her kids back soon, and the money would start rolling in. That night, I couldn't sleep thinking about what she said about my biological father's death and survivor benefits. I grabbed my laptop and started searching government websites about Social Security survivor benefits and life insurance policies. The Social Security website said minor children could get benefits if a parent died, but only if that parent had worked enough quarters to qualify. I searched my biological father's name and found an obituary from 6 years ago saying he died in a motorcycle accident with no life insurance and left behind significant medical debt from his final hospital stay. The article mentioned he'd been unemployed for 2 years before his death and had no assets. I took screenshots of everything and realized Fiona had been lying about money that never existed. Over the next few days, I gathered all my evidence into one massive file on my laptop. I had recordings of Fiona coaching witnesses, screenshots of her Venmo bribes, photos of the apartment conditions, copies of the fake CPS reports Kelly had confirmed, documentation of the credit card fraud, and now proof that the survivor benefits were completely made up. I organized everything into folders with clear labels and timestamps, then made multiple backup copies on flash drives I kept hidden in different places. Leslie and Kelly both needed to see this, but I had to be careful about when and how to share it. Wednesday morning, I was in the shower when I heard Fiona going through my stuff in the bedroom. I rushed out with shampoo still in my hair to find her dumping my backpack on the floor and reading printed emails between me and Derek about the legal case. Her face turned red and she started screaming that I was a traitor and a spy just like everyone else who'd ever left her. She threw my textbooks into the hallway and ripped up my homework while calling me every name she could think of. I grabbed my phone and laptop before she could destroy them and shoved them in my school bag while she kept yelling about how I'd betrayed her after she'd given me everything. The neighbors started banging on the walls telling her to shut up, but she just got louder. I got dressed as fast as I could and ran out while she was still throwing my things around. After that, I started staying at the school as late as possible every day. Hope let me use her office to do homework and study for tests while avoiding the apartment. She never asked questions, but always had snacks in her desk drawer that she'd leave out for me. Around 6 every evening, Mom would text that she was in the parking lot with dinner. We'd sit in her car eating takeout and talking about normal stuff like my classes and college applications while carefully not mentioning Fiona. Mom would slip me clean clothes and toiletries in a bag that I'd hide in my locker. Then I'd wait until 8 or 9 before going back to Fiona's place when I knew she'd either be passed out or watching TV. Thursday, the home evaluator showed up for the scheduled visit that Fiona had been preparing for all week. She'd cleaned the living room spotlessly and cooked an actual meal that didn't come from a box. She'd even bought flowers for the table and put on nice clothes instead of her usual stained sweatpants. The evaluator walked through taking notes while Fiona explained how she was creating a loving home for her daughter. But when he opened the cabinet under the kitchen sink to check the plumbing, roaches scattered everywhere across the floor. He took photos of them running up the walls and across the counter where the food was sitting. Fiona tried to say they must have just come from next door, but he kept taking pictures of the bugs and the mouse droppings he found behind the stove. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from Fiona that changed every few hours. One message would say she loved me and wanted to be the mother I deserved, and how we could build a beautiful life together. An hour later, she'd send paragraphs calling me ungrateful and selfish and threatening to destroy my adoptive parents in court if I didn't start showing her respect. Then she'd switch back to saying she forgave me and understood I was confused because of their manipulation. I screenshotted every single message and forwarded them to Derek without responding to any of them. The credit bureau finally called to confirm they were removing the fraudulent account from my record after their investigation. The detective assigned to my identity theft case wanted to meet for a formal statement about the credit card application. I went to the police station and told him just the facts about finding the account, when it was opened and that I hadn't authorized it. He asked if I knew who might have done it, but I just said the address on the application was where I was currently staying and left it at that. Leanna called Friday afternoon with good news about my sibling visitation request. She said it had been approved and I could meet Michelle in person next Tuesday at the agency office with supervision. She explained that Michelle had been through 4 different foster homes in 2 years and had trust issues from all the moves. She warned me to keep my expectations realistic and not push too hard for connection right away. Michelle might not even want to talk at first, and that would be okay. Monday morning, we all went back to court for another hearing about the custody situation. The judge reviewed all the reports from CPS, the home evaluator, and Leslie's recommendations. She ordered Fiona to attend parenting classes every week and complete financial counseling before any custody changes could happen. Fiona jumped up and started arguing, but the judge warned her about contempt. She stormed out of the courtroom yelling about corruption, and her lawyer had to chase her into the parking lot to calm her down. That afternoon, Derek called with advice about my living situation. He suggested I file a request for modified arrangements where I could split time between both households while the case continued. This would give me legal breaks from Fiona while still showing the court I was trying to make the relationship work. I packed a bag that same night and told Fiona I needed my computer for a school project. She watched me from the couch while I grabbed clothes and notebooks. Her eyes tracked every move I made around the apartment. At my parents' house, Mom had my favorite dinner ready, and Dad cleared space at his desk for me to study. The next morning, I went back to Fiona's place and she was waiting by the door. She asked why I didn't come home last night, and I explained about the big history paper due Friday. Her face got tight, but she couldn't really stop me since the court hadn't said I couldn't go places. This became my new pattern for the next week. I'd spend one night at Mom and Dad's house for school stuff, and then go back to Fiona's roach-filled apartment. Each time I left, Fiona got more upset and started sending angry texts about loyalty and real family. Tuesday morning, she cornered me in the kitchen and shoved her phone in my face. The Venmo app was open, showing the frozen $60,000. She said the landlord was threatening to kick us out if she didn't pay rent by Friday. I took screenshots of her messages about needing the money and told her the bank had frozen it during their investigation. She grabbed my shoulders and shook me hard enough that my teeth clicked together. She screamed that I was ruining everything just like my adoptive parents taught me. I pulled away and ran to my room, locking the door while she pounded on it. That afternoon, my phone started blowing up with notifications from Facebook and Instagram. Alan had posted screenshots of old family photos with long rants about ungrateful kids who forget where they came from. He called me a spoiled princess who chose money over blood and tagged everyone we both knew. The comments were getting nasty with people I'd never met calling me terrible names. I took screenshots of everything and saved them in a folder labeled defamation evidence, but didn't respond to any of it. Derek had told me not to engage online since it could make things worse in court. Wednesday morning, Kelly called and asked me to meet her at the agency office. She sat me down and looked serious while explaining that my job wasn't to be a detective. She said the court had professionals to investigate Fiona, and I needed to focus on staying safe. She gave me a card with a special phone number that would connect directly to emergency services if Fiona got violent. She made me program it into my phone and practice calling it 3 times. She also set up a code word system where if I texted homework help to her number, someone would come get me immediately. Thursday, the mail carrier knocked on Fiona's door with a thick envelope that required signature. Fiona ripped it open and her face went white as she read. The evaluator's report was brutal with photos of the roaches, the mold, and the broken locks. It listed all of Fiona's coached witnesses and the payments she'd made to them. The report said reunification wasn't appropriate and recommended supervised visits only. It questioned whether Fiona could provide a stable environment for any children. Fiona threw the papers at the wall and started destroying things in the living room. She smashed plates and kicked holes in the already damaged walls. I locked myself in the bathroom and texted Kelly the code word, but then canceled it when Fiona calmed down. Friday was supposed to be a normal school day until Fiona showed up at lunch. She pushed through the cafeteria doors and started yelling my name. Everyone turned to stare as she ran toward my table, crying about how I was breaking her heart. She grabbed my arm and tried to pull me up while sobbing that I was her baby and she loved me. My friends backed away as she made a huge scene. The resource officer had to physically remove her from the building. He wrote up an official trespass warning that meant she'd be arrested if she came back. The whole thing was recorded by at least 20 kids and posted online within an hour. Saturday, I walked into the bookstore down the street and asked if they were hiring. The manager said they needed weekend help and I could start immediately if I wanted. I filled out the paperwork and worked my first 4-hour shift that afternoon. It felt good to do something normal like organizing books and helping customers find what they needed. When I got back to Fiona's apartment, she was waiting with her hand out. She said if I was working, then I needed to contribute half my paycheck to expenses. I hadn't even gotten paid yet, but she wanted me to commit to giving her the money. I told her I'd think about it, and she started yelling about ungrateful kids who take advantage. Sunday, my parents called Derek and suggested we try mediation with Leslie to set boundaries. Everyone thought it might help reduce the fighting if we could agree on basic rules. Leslie scheduled it for Monday afternoon at the courthouse in a conference room. Mom said privately she didn't think Fiona would follow any agreement, but it was worth trying. Monday, we all sat around a big table with Leslie taking notes. My parents started by saying they just wanted what was best for me. Fiona immediately started screaming that they stole me and had no right to opinions. Leslie tried to redirect the conversation to communication boundaries. Fiona stood up and knocked her chair over. She yelled that this was all a conspiracy to keep her from her daughter. She stormed out, calling us all liars and saying she'd see us in court. The whole meeting lasted maybe 10 minutes before falling apart. Leslie wrote everything down and noted that Fiona couldn't prioritize my well-being over her own anger. Tuesday morning, Derek called to say the judge had scheduled a hearing for next week about the harassment and identity theft. He wanted to meet Wednesday to practice my testimony. He said I should stick to facts and avoid getting emotional since Fiona's lawyer would try to twist my words. We spent 3 hours going over possible questions and how to answer them clearly. The night before court, Derek showed up at my parents' house with Hope, and they set up a mock courtroom in our living room using dining chairs. Derek played Fiona's lawyer and threw every nasty question at me he could think of while Hope watched my body language and coached me to keep my hands still. They made me practice saying the same facts over and over until I could recite dates and details without getting emotional or angry. Hope taught me to take 3 deep breaths before answering any question, and to look at the judge instead of Fiona when I spoke. We practiced until almost midnight, and Derek made me go through the credit card timeline 4 times to make sure I wouldn't mess up any dates. The next morning I threw up twice before we left for court, and Mom held my hair back without saying anything. At the courthouse, Derek met us in the lobby and reminded me one last time to stick to facts and let the evidence speak for itself. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. Fiona sat at the other table wearing a dress I'd never seen her in, and her lawyer kept whispering in her ear while shuffling papers. When my turn came, I walked to the witness stand and my hands were shaking, so bad I had to grip the rail to steady them. The judge asked me to explain the recordings, and I pulled out my phone with all the files labeled by date. I played the one where Fiona coached the fake witnesses, and the courtroom went completely silent, except for her voice talking about Alan lying for $10,000. Then I played the one about getting government benefits for 8 kids, and Fiona's lawyer jumped up objecting, but the judge told him to sit down. I showed the credit card application with my social security number in Fiona's handwriting, and the Venmo screenshots of all the bribes. Fiona's lawyer stood up and started talking about a desperate mother who just wanted her stolen child back after years of separation. He said the recordings were taken out of context, and that Fiona was traumatized from having her baby sold when she was only 15. He tried to make it sound like my parents had manipulated me into gathering evidence against my real mother. The judge asked him directly if he was denying the credit fraud, and he started talking in circles about misunderstandings and good intentions. Then the judge turned to Fiona and asked if she wanted to explain the credit card application, and Fiona started crying about how hard it was to be separated from her daughter. The judge cut her off and said crying wasn't an answer to the question about identity theft. She issued a protective order right there that said Fiona could only see me during supervised visits at the agency office. She ordered Fiona to complete parenting classes and mental health counseling within 90 days or face criminal charges. She scheduled a review hearing for 3 months out and warned Fiona that any contact outside the supervised visits would result in immediate arrest. Fiona's lawyer asked for more time to present character witnesses, but the judge said the evidence of fraud and harassment was clear enough. After court, I went back to Fiona's apartment to pack my stuff, while she sat on the couch staring at the TV. I grabbed my clothes from the floor where I'd been keeping them in a garbage bag, and took my toothbrush from the moldy bathroom. She didn't look at me or say goodbye, just kept watching some game show with the volume turned up loud. I walked out with my single bag of belongings and got in my parents' car where they were waiting in the parking lot. 2 weeks later, Liana called to say my first visit with Michelle was approved for the following Saturday at the agency office. I showed up early and waited in a room with kid drawings on the walls and a box of broken crayons on the table. Michelle came in holding her foster mom's hand and wouldn't look at me at first. We sat at the little table and I started coloring a picture of a house while she watched from across the table. After about 20 minutes, she picked up a crayon and started adding flowers to my drawing. She told me her foster family had a dog named Biscuit, who slept in her bed and knew how to shake hands. By the end of the hour, she was showing me all the pictures she'd drawn that week and asking if I'd come back next time. The financial aid office sent a letter saying my appeal was approved, and the Venmo money wouldn't count against me since it was part of an ongoing legal case. I qualified for state grants that would cover most of my tuition at the local university, but not enough for the private schools I'd dreamed about. Fiona started leaving voicemails on my phone that I'd forward to the supervision agency, without listening to more than the first few seconds. They documented everything and adjusted the visitation rules to require an agency worker present at all times. Dad wanted to sue Alan for defamation after all his online posts, but Derek wrote a cease and desist letter instead that basically said stop or we'll take you to court. Alan deleted everything within a day and never posted about us again. Hope met with me after school to help write my college essay, and we went through 6 drafts trying to find the right balance. We focused on my future goals in social work and how I wanted to help kids in the system instead of making it all about trauma. She helped me write about resilience without using any cliches or making myself sound like a victim looking for pity. The detective called 2 days later and asked me to come to the station about the credit card case. I sat in a small room with bad coffee while she typed up my statement about finding the card application with my social on it. She showed me copies of the paperwork Fiona had signed using my information and asked about specific dates and times. I stuck to basic facts about when I discovered the account and how I'd never given permission for anyone to use my social. She told me Fiona would probably just get probation if they convicted her, but at least there'd be a record if she tried anything again. Leslie met with me and my parents the next week to talk about long-term plans for the sibling visits. She pulled out a calendar and marked monthly supervised visits with Michelle and the other kids who wanted to see me. She also penciled in quarterly sessions where Fiona could be present if she followed all the court requirements and stayed in counseling. It wasn't perfect, but it meant I could keep seeing my siblings without Fiona using them against me. 3 months passed before the review hearing where we'd see if Fiona had done what the judge ordered. She showed up in a new outfit trying to look responsible, but the court clerk read out her attendance records. She'd completed the parenting classes but missed 4 counseling sessions, saying she had work conflicts each time. The judge looked at her over his glasses and extended the supervised order for another 6 months. He told her this was her last chance to show she could put her kids first instead of herself. Meanwhile, I got my acceptance letter from the state university with a spot in their honors program. The financial aid package included scholarships that would cover most of my tuition if I majored in social work. Between that and my bookstore job, I could afford to go if I lived at home freshman year. It wasn't the fancy private school I dreamed about, but Kelly and Hope had both written recommendation letters talking about my resilience. Michelle and I had been meeting every month at the agency office, and she'd gotten comfortable enough to hug me when I arrived. At our visit before my birthday, she pulled out a card she'd made with construction paper and glitter that said, "Best Big Sister" in crayon. The Rivers family told me later that she talked about me all the time at home and kept asking when she'd see me again. They said having a consistent person in her life was helping her trust adults more, and she wasn't having as many nightmares. 6 months after that awful night I'd moved in with Fiona, we had a regular family dinner at home. Mom made her lasagna again, and Dad grilled steaks to celebrate his promotion that meant no more second job. We talked about my class schedule for fall and which dorm supplies I'd need even though I'd be commuting. Mom showed us pictures of her garden where the tomatoes were finally growing after 3 failed attempts. Nobody mentioned lawyers or court dates or custody battles the whole meal. I'd started seeing a therapist every other week to work through everything that had happened. She helped me understand I couldn't save all my siblings by myself and it wasn't my job to fix Fiona. Some sessions I just cried about how unfair it all was, and other times we practiced saying no to guilt trips. She taught me techniques for when I felt overwhelmed by having 2 families that would never fit together nicely. At graduation, I walked across the stage in my cap and gown while my parents cheered from the bleachers. Dad whistled when they called my name, and Mom took about 50 pictures even though I told her 10 would be enough. I thought about Michelle and my other siblings scattered in different foster homes watching their own big sister graduate. Maybe someday they'd be walking across a stage like this, knowing I'd fought to stay in their lives. The principal handed me my diploma, and I held it up for my parents to see. Everything I'd been through to get here felt worth it in that moment, even if the story wasn't close to over. All right, that's all from me today. Thanks for sticking with me and letting me throw all my questions out there. Until next time, stay curious. Like the video, it helps more than you think.